In other news now, National Assembly has approved the Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill. The bill aims to establish the Transmission System Operator Company, which will deal with the electricity transmission system after Eskom unbundling into 3 entities. So it will also provide penalties of up to 5 million rand and 10-year imprisonment for people or entities that steal electricity or damage electricity infrastructure. The bill has been in the making for quite some time following the announcement to unbundle Eskom. It wants to deal with the governance framework of the transmission entity, the decline in energy availability factor, and improve competition. So for more on this, we're going to be joined via Teams by Alexandra Felekis, Counsel on Energy and Project Specialist at Allen Overy. Alexandra, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here on the SABC at this hour.
Thanks for having me. Great to be chatting to you today.
So Alexandra, just looking at questions about equitable distribution of costs and what's coming to the fore in the bill. I mean, talk to us about the advantages and disadvantages of the bill in electricity generation in the country and solving this energy crisis at hand.
Sure. So, I mean, the whole purpose of the bill is to move us away from a vertically integrated electricity structure. So inherently the monopoly that is Eskom. So in the past, we've been reliant on Eskom for generation, supply, transmission and distribution of energy. And what the bill seeks to do is basically open this up to the private sector so that private sector entities can effectively generate, supply, transmit and distribute energy in the same way that Eskom does. So leveling the playing field in terms of how these core functions in the electricity sector will work. Importantly, that means that there'll be more choice for electricity consumers. Will that happen immediately? I'm sorry to say, but probably not. As you may be aware, what we have had happen while the bill has been in process is that private generation is already permitted in terms of our electricity law. So that is that a private generating entity can actually sell energy directly to a heavy electricity consumer through a power purchase agreement. But the Act basically just opens this up to a much greater level in that it actually develops or allows for the establishment of a market trading platform where energy is basically traded on an inter-hour or daily basis. So very different from how energy is bought and sold currently in our sector. As you mentioned, importantly, it obviously then deals with the unbundling of Eskom and the establishment of the National Transmission System Company, and gives us a lot of detail into, what their role will be and how their role will be regulated.
Thank you.
The question on everyone's mind is...
Alexandra, do continue. Thank you so much.
Go ahead. I was just going to say 2 things that I think are important for everyone to know that's watching.
Yes, sure, absolutely.
The key questions on everyone's mind is whether this bill ends load shedding and whether it automatically drives down electricity prices. And the real answer is that it wouldn't do so immediately. And the reason for this is, if you think about load shedding, you would think, well, if we're going to have diverse sources of supply and we aren't completely reliant on Eskom, then surely that assists with load shedding. The problem is that Eskom is still the monopoly owner of base load generating capacity in South Africa, obviously being its coal assets, its coal fleet. And until we actually have an established gas industry or supply of gas in South Africa for energy generation, or batteries are actually competitively priced at a utility scale level, we are still very much reliant on Eskom basically sorting out its coal fleet of generating assets. But that's not to say that having diverse sources of supply, be that renewables or gas and batteries, in the future wouldn't assist with security of supply. It would. But for the moment, what we should all be focusing on is NECOM's plans in relation to the ending of load shedding.
Alexandra,
in terms of driving down electricity.
Yes, thank you so much for setting that context for us. You've spoken to, the role of private power and purchase agreements as all that's coming into the mix, and whether ultimately this is going to drive down costs and also provide electricity at hand. Questions about the implementation, a major factor as to whether this transition is going to work. We're also looking at some of the structure of the tariffs and the impact that it will have on consumers at large. It's got the issue of returns of commensurate risk. Talk to us a little bit more about that, but also the role of NERSA itself. Questions about whether that's also going to be strengthened. What will its role be in this competitive market, given, the roles of regulatory oversight and dealing with corruption at large?
Yeah. So, I think that NERSA's role has definitely been strengthened, and I think that obviously in certain instances that's actually needed. So, for example, NERSA will regulate that the transmission system operator will actually operate the transmission network in a fair and equitable manner, and basically won't be biased to Eskom, because Eskom will be the private sector's biggest competitor in the generation and retail space. So NERSA will basically regulate that for as long as the transmission system operator is affiliated to Eskom generation assets. So that's one area where it's appreciated that Eskom has, that NERSA has this regulatory oversight. What's really important to this being successful is buy-in from the private sector. And that means making a framework that is conducive to private sector investment and the funding by external banks and financial institutions. And what's really important from that perspective is that there isn't over-regulation by NERSA on pricing when it comes to the market platform, or in terms of private bilateral deals, so private generation power purchase agreements that I alluded to before. This needs to work that NERSA will regulate where basically the market isn't getting it right and there is still no security of supply. But to the extent that the market is operating in a competitive way as it should, there should be less regulation by NERSA, especially as it comes to electricity prices. Obviously, certain prices will always be regulated, and those are the prices that are actually fall within the regulatory ambit of the regulatory sector. So, for example, under our Renewable Energy IPP procurement program, any project or generation capacity procured in terms of that program, where Eskom then, as Eskom, or under the new framework, the Central Purchasing Agency of the transmission system operator will purchase those kilowatt hours, megawatt hours. There you would have NERSA regulating the tariff that is charged by generators. So there's a bit of a balancing act in terms of when it's needed and when it shouldn't be implemented, because it would potentially not let the market develop.
And Alexandra, just as we conclude, given the tariff determination that's come to the fore, the process of determining the price of electricity to consumers, it's got far-reaching consequences. And I wonder if you could speak to the financial viability of the sector, the quality, the affordability of consumer services as well, but also in relation to questions about social and environmental concerns that have also come to the fore.
So, I think that it's very difficult to comment on the tariff framework as something that's final. I think that it still requires a lot of stakeholder engagement before it's actually settled and is implemented in the way that was basically introduced, or at least proposed by NERSA. There's also a question as to timing of when this would be implemented. You need Eskom on board basically in order for this to be implemented in the way that NERSA wants it to. So in my view, it seems that we potentially are under, at least for the next 2 years, still under the framework of the multi-year price determination, and instead of actually going straight into the electricity pricing rules. But it is an evolving area, so it's one to watch.
Alexandra, thank you for joining us at this hour and for helping us make sense of, what this is going to entail. We'll leave the conversation there for now and continue to monitor developments on that front as it unfolds. National Assembly having approved the Electricity Regulation Amendment Bill. Alexandra Felekis, Counsel on Energy and Project Specialist at Allen Overy, weighing in.